So Ruben's up. First of all, my name is Ruben Almagrove, State Director for Emergency Management. Let me start again there. Good afternoon. My name is Ruben Almagrove, the interim director for the State Division of Emergency Management. First, let me thank Congressman Posey for doing his due diligence in trying to get the message out to not only his district but his community. If there's any one responsibility that I have, but the same responsibility that everybody has in this room and watching this on TV, is to first of all get a plan and be prepared. Government will never be big enough for you at the local, state, or the federal level to take care of all your needs. And so you have a civic responsibility to be prepared and get a plan. So what happened last year, 2008 hurricane season? Pretty much nothing other than this little tropical storm called Faye that is over a $300 million disaster in the state of Florida. If we try to remind people that if you've lived in Florida, you either have been through a hurricane or you will be through a hurricane. No difference in a computer user. Most of them have computers, and most of them have, guess what, lost data on that computer. Our hard drive has crashed. And if that hasn't happened to you yet, wait, it will. And there is no difference with hurricanes. 40% of all the hurricanes that affect are created in the Atlantic affect Florida in some way, shape, or form. So statistically, we will get hit by a hurricane, if not this year, in the very near future. So if you look at those lines, you can see they get pretty close to Florida. Remember, last year we had Gustav, Ike, and Hannah. We got a presidential declaration for both Gustav and Ike, and yet we know a tropical storm created more chaos, devastation, and loss of life than even a hurricane. So it's a matter of where it hits. It matters how long it stays, but remember, Scott mentioned, it's not just the winds. It's the storm surge. It's the tornadoes. It's the floods. And most recently, we've just gotten significant impact with floods, not only in my drive down here from Tallahassee, but more importantly, in Volusia County, not far from here. Currently today is over a $50 million storm based on just tropical storm rainfalls that affected this state. And if you've been here long, since 1851, you can see the impacts of hurricanes on the coast of the United States. It's important to know, really simply, that weather will affect you. It affects us every day, and that's why it's important to have a plan and be prepared for 6 months out of the year for just hurricane season. Well, who's got a vacation on September 10th? I would cancel it. If you go back 100 years and you look at hurricanes and tropical storms, the peak of hurricane season is September 10th. That means that June 1st, there's obviously been hurricanes before June 1st. There's been hurricanes after December 1st. But we know that we're still very early to hurricane season. Remember that little A storm called Hurricane Andrew happened in August. June, nothing was going on. The state and locals and federal government just warning us about being prepared for hurricanes. And look, nothing's happened in July. And early August starts. I was living in South Florida, working for the fire department, nothing. This will be one of those really hurricane seasons that nothing happens. And yet Scott hit it right on the money. It's all about one. All we need to have was one Category 3 storm, Category 3, not a Category 5, hit a densely populated area in this state. Not only lives will be lost, but the economic engine of this state will crash. And that means we as citizens of this great state have to be prepared to make sure that we're ready for that, not just September 10th date, but throughout the 6 months of hurricane season. I'd love to show you this entire diagram of how a disaster works, but there's sort of three different individuals that are not discussed in here. You'll learn about local government, you'll hear about state government. We'll share with you a little bit here about what the role of state government is, as well as the federal government. First of all, the private sector. There's a lot of things that Home Depot, Publix, and a lot of other businesses throughout the state can do much better than government ever can do. And so our goal is to always partner with private sector during disaster and after the recovery efforts. 2, volunteer organizations. John will tell you, the faith-based organizations, the Red Cross, that you don't see anywhere in this chart are the behind-the-scenes heroes during disasters. They're not only doing it every day, but they step up to the plate during disasters, provide the necessary assistance that we can coordinate from both Tallahassee and on the ground where the impacts occur. And lastly, again, I'll remind you, It's about not being a victim and being a survivor. It's your role as human beings on this earth. People go across the entire state. You'll hear it on TV and radio, the victims of the disaster. First of all, the only victims of the disaster are those that did not survive and unfortunately have to be buried. Everybody who makes it through a disaster is a survivor. And that is a tremendous change in mindset and psychological thinking. That means if you're a survivor, your role is to, first of all, take care of yourself and your family. Second, your role as a survivor to have the optimism to help rebuild your community and, more importantly, help your neighbors. So there are no really victims that we want during disasters. All we want are survivors. And if you're one of those survivors, take care of somebody next to where you live. Check on your neighbor. Help out your community rebuild. Who's in charge of disaster? This is gets a little hairy, but I will tell you, unless you're an elected official in local government, you're not in charge of anything. Mayor, you're in the back here. I think it's very clear in Florida Chapter 252 that the elected official of that local community is the only person who can declare a state of emergency. The emergency management director has no authority at the local level, but that local elected official will declare a state of emergency, and he is technically the incident commander of that disaster, and he commands his forces and resources, law enforcement, emergency management directors, county administrators, law enforcement, to aid and take care of the people of that community. Second, the state of Florida, it's the governor. We will, or sometimes not, be asked for assistance from the locals. It would be great that the state of Florida could never be asked for assistance from the locals. You know why? Because the locals get it. They've been prepared, they have resources, and they're managing their disasters. But there are just some events, and it's not just hurricanes, it's wildfires, tornadoes. It could be an outbreak in your community, or hopefully never a terrorist attack in that area. If that assistance is requested, it's going to come from the mayor to the governor, not to Ruben Almaguer. I, again, have no authority as the state interim director of emergency management. The governor signs a state of emergency for the state of Florida for those counties that are affected, and then he tasks me as a state coordinating officer to work with John and local officials to make sure that all your resources are met. All we're doing is, and we're not in charge of anything. Well, my goal is to make sure that we coordinate and assist and give you the resources that you request. And lastly, the president. There'll be times that disaster outreaches the capabilities of the state. Remember, this state has 20 million people, tremendous resources. We've learned a lot from previous disasters, but I will tell you, there'll be disasters that will request federal assistance. That being said, the governor requests assistance from the president, not Ruben Almaguer to Craig Fugate, the FEMA administrator. The president, if he approves federal assistance, he will then authorize federal assets as well as federal reimbursement for those disasters. And more importantly, last slide, it doesn't really matter. I think our success in failure in disaster, do we work as a team? Do I sit next to John with the federal partners in Florida and manage that disaster? The day we can't work together, it doesn't matter who's in charge, we will fail the residents of Florida. So our success will be locals, and not only the municipalities working with county government, but county, state, and federal partnered side by side during disaster. What's my mission? My mission on behalf of the governor is no different than the same mission at the local level, is to provide within the first 72 hours, make sure that area that's been impacted by a storm or any other event is safe and secure. There is this tremendous comfort after those winds died down that, guess what? There's no power. For some reason, the water's contaminated. The internet's not working. Your cell phone's not working. There's limited fuel in the community. Tremendous comfort will come to your community if local and state law enforcement officers, including the Florida National Guard, have a presence in your community. You will feel much better staying at home, taking care of your family, and start rebuilding your schools. And so that's the primary mission that we will provide, safety and security. Now guess what that means? I'm not bringing food and water 3 hours after the event. That's the importance of you having enough commodities and resources, food, water, medicines, and not only for yourself, but for your animals, at least for the first 72 hours. And I'm going to say that's for a small storm. Category 3 to 5 storm, you're going to need enough resources to take care of your family for 5 to 7 days. The state will be as aggressive as we can. We have more capabilities than ever, but I hate to give you too much optimism that we're going to come within 6 hours and save the day. My goal is to make sure you're safe and secure in your community, and then we'll bring you some resources. And I'm not going to go over this detailed list here, but if you know, it's medical supplies, water, food, and shelter, and emergency fuel are those first things that we will bring to you. If you notice, I didn't mention ice. We remind people that ice is nice. We're not going to provide ice that is a huge expense to the local, state, and federal government immediately after disaster. Now, there's places that we got to bring ice. Insulin has to be refrigerated. Hospitals, and there's key areas that need to have ice, and locals will be making those requests to the state. But you know what? That's not our primary mission. Our mission is, once that we have the area safe and secure, is to go ahead and get primary commodities and resources, and then literally start rebuilding that community. You gotta take care of critical infrastructures, fire stations, sheriff's office, hospital facilities, and then start rebuilding the community, which means you gotta get schools open quickly. If kids can't go to school, moms and dads can't go to work, which means you just stopped the ability for that community to rebuild. Next slide. We've learned a lot from the 2004-2005 hurricane season, and thank you must go to the governor and the Florida legislature for doing one thing. Is through House Bill 7121, we established what we call in state government an acronym, the SLRC, State Logistics Response Center. I call it a code name for a warehouse. Simply, it's just a place, a 200,000 square foot facility in Orlando that we've done one thing right in the state. We actually have things in place ready for the disaster. In the past, like most states still do today, you contract in place. You go through some vendors, you identify, you go through a bid process, nobody's spent a dollar, you have it ready, and when disaster happens, we all request food and water from the same vendor. John's requesting it from the same vendor. I have a state term contract. So is FEMA. So is Publix. And so there's limited resources, and guess what? We get very little. Well, this state has put its money where it actually counts in taking care of lives and reducing suffering. So we already have the capability sitting in, that's only one of the 4 warehouses at a combined facility that we will get down to the ground as quickly as possible after this, the winds died down in that community. Next slide. And I'm almost finished here, but it's all about one message, one voice. If the mayor is saying something different than the governor is, and the congressman saying something different than the mayor is, and I have a municipality, I have county commissioners, I have city commissioners, we need to be unified in the message. And the message is very clear, and it's sometimes complex during disaster. We've done some research, and some people have not known, do I have to evacuate? Am I in an evacuation zone? What about contraflow or reverse laning? Is the state going to be doing that? Is that the local's decision? Is that the state's decision? And I'm here to tell you that we better be unified. And this governor is not going to be managing the disasters from Tallahassee. He's going to be here with elected officials before, during, and after the disaster to make sure that we're on the same page, same message, and both the governor and local elected officials, mayor, will be reaching out to the residents of your community, telling them not only what is going on, but what to do about it. And guess what? It's a disaster. It won't be perfect. There's things that are going to fall through the cracks that the local government somehow couldn't pull off for you. And there's going to be some things the state government may try to accomplish, may not happen. But the message is, if we're not doing it, what can be done to fix that? And lastly, the exciting part in the eyes of some of the first responders is the response phase. But I'll tell you, the suffering and devastation that occurs is really in the recovery phase. Every single day, my job is not focused on response. We're still dealing. We just closed Hurricane Andrew out a year ago. The recovery of a disaster. We have 18 open disasters still today that we're managing across the state. It's the rebuilding of roads and infrastructure and businesses and communities. People have lost a lot, and it takes a long time to rebuild those communities that were devastated. All you got to do is go to Homestead today, and it looks a lot different than it did in 1992, but you can go to some areas that still look like 1992 when it hit it. And lastly, get a plan. I'm just going to emphasize the last little point there. Kids get a plan. We're trying to get pretty aggressive in finding new innovative ways to try to drive parents crazy. And one of the ways is through your kids, which they probably do every day anyway. That being said, we have done a website that allows kids to interactively, with a partnership with Disney Ideas, design their own Kids Get a Plan disaster kit. And so it's timed, it's a race, they can see the best scores that that come out, which kids did get their plan the fastest. It's a little box where kids put their name, Ryan or Mary, and they actually hunt through a kitchen, through each of the cabinets, and find what they're supposed to put in their plan. But guess what? There's things in that kitchen cabinet that you're not supposed to put in your kit. So we're trying to get them to the point where they build a disaster kit. We're going to kick it off this year with Eric Smith, the Commissioner of Education for the state, and superintendents and principals, because we want every kid, the beginning of this the peak of this hurricane season, which will be the beginning of this school season, to take home to their parents a one piece of paper and says, Mom, where's our flashlight? Mom, where's the food and water we're going to have for our kit? So any way that we can do to help promote hurricane preparedness, not just through this event, through the congressman's outreach, but the local, state, and federal level, people simply have to get a plan and be prepared, because government, even though we'll come to your aid, it's your responsibility in the state and on this earth to take care of yourself and your family. Thank you very much.